Australia, again, we talk a lot about South Australia. They're doing a lot of things with the electrical grid down there. I wanted to touch on the what they're calling a virtual power plant.
But don't they
And
wish
what
they didn't?
and what this is basically is they have a three-step plan where they've signed up a number of homeowners to take a Tesla Powerwall into their home. They already have solar on their roofs, and it will collect the energy, put it in the Powerwall, and they'll be able to share it amongst the community when it's needed. So the first plan was to have 250 homeowners install these power walls and start to share it with the software. So the utility is involved. They help share, they shave off the peaks and valleys of demand by pulling from the homeowners' stored electricity in these power walls. And they were successful enough to roll it into phase two, which is 1,100 homes. So these 11, they are now somewhere between phase one and phase two. They haven't quite reached the 1,100, but this has been going on now for over a year. And during that year, the utility has faced some issues with the power grid. And what's happened is even with the small amount of homes that have these power walls, they've been able to help the utility out of a few binds where brownouts were happening, where they were unable to get power to a certain area and were going to have to fire up a peaker plant. They were able to pull the energy from these stored units and share that power across the grid and not have to fire up the peaker plants. So it's been a cost savings in a number of different ways. They can see, the utility can see that this savings is going to allow them to make this cost effective rather quickly. Now, it's been such a success over the past year that they've now started to push on to phase three. And phase three is 50,000 homes are going to have a power wall. So this, with them being able to see that it's saved them a couple times already, pushing it out to 50 times more than what they have is going to give them even a better utility to deal with problems as time goes along. So we've talked about this before in the show where we're having these community-based type virtual power walls seem to be a good idea. Yeah, you're spending, upwards of $8,000 US for every power wall, but the utility is subsidizing this because it allows them to cut out peaker plants. It allows them to save on the switching. It allows them to stop the curve of electricity pricing. They can cut it off at the top and take this power that's already stored and use it again. So they are subsidizing the purchase of these so the homeowner doesn't have to foot the whole bill. And what they do is they get the ability of storing their solar and running their home at a cheaper rate all throughout the day and night because they can grab it from the sun, store it, and use it at any time that they wish. So just another success story that Southern Australia is doing with this power generation and the work with your utilities, because they've been in such a bind and over the past 4 years where they haven't had the proper infrastructure and they've ran into so many issues that they've had to look at these inventive new ways to collect, save, and reuse the electricity that they have. And it's great to see that it's working, and hopefully this will be the model for other places in the world to start saying, you know what, why aren't we as a utility offering this to our clients? And we can build our own virtual power plant within our own city or our own region and allow us to benefit from what South Australia is currently showing us.
I guess that's pretty ballsy by the utility, because what's to prevent the consumer from saying, I'm just going to cut the connection to the utility and run my power wall?
There is a contract, Paul.
Yeah.
So someone will come by and repo your unit if you don't follow the rules.
But you know what? Yeah. That's another business model for the utility. Say, look, we'll lease you a power wall instead of selling you kilowatt hours.
Yeah.
And you can eventually disconnect from our grid if you want to, if you have a system that can handle it, or a home that, and they could be in the energy business, not the electricity business or whatever.
All I can think about is how soon can we start that here?
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
there's a power company in New Jersey that's doing a similar program with the Powerwalls.
we've been harping on decentralized power grids in the U.S. for years, and it's one of my things. To your point, Paul, when I was selling home energy for Tesla, and I ran into this all the time, I want to get off the grid. I want to get off the grid. Why? Well, I don't want to pay for the power. Well, nobody wants to pay rapacious rates for electricity. But why? You don't necessarily need to be cut off from the grid. What you need is to be independent. You have the grid to fall back on. You have the grid to sell electricity back to if you make extra electricity. But being connected to the grid by itself isn't evil, isn't bad. It's when you're fully dependent on that pipeline that you don't have any choices. Then you're buying it whatever they sell. And if you don't buy it, your house gets cold and dark. So this is way, way overdue. It's a no-brainer, common sense kind of thing that we should be doing. And here's the tough part. I have no idea how to implement it. Is it laws? Is it incentives? Is it subsidies? I don't know. No matter what happens, people seem to find a way to screw something like that up. But clearly, for the future of us, citizens, homeowners, renters, whatever, we should have something like this available, and so that we don't pay horrible rates, so that we do have a little bit of, if lightning knocks out a pole 6 miles away, my house shouldn't go dark. That's stupid. That's just fucking dumb. Okay. That's the kind of thing that this brings in. I'm sorry, Mark, I rambled.
I think this, this example of South Australia, who again have had major issues with their power grid to this point. I think if you want to be someone that moves forward with it, I don't think there's anything stopping you now. If you have the ability to have solar on your current house, you have the ability to add a power wall to that. Whether it's one or two, you could start to be still connected to the grid, but collect your own electricity throughout the day and then use that electricity at night at the lower rate. So again, it has to be cost effective in some ways, unless you just want to do it because you can. But you do have to weigh, are you one of these places like, say, for example, in Hawaii, where the rates are wildly different than the continental US. So you've got where you're paying a large amount per kilowatt in Hawaii. It makes a ton of sense to spend the $8,000 to have a power wall, to spend $20,000 to have the solar array and hook them together. Does it make that much sense here in Ontario? Not really. The grid that I'm connected to is extremely reliable. It's relatively cheap, basically 10 to 11 cents Canadian per kilowatt.
Wow.
And it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to go into that. But if you're in California, where you're paying wildly different rates based on peak demand, it makes sense again. So you have to look at your situation, what you're paying, how you use your electricity, and it basically becomes a math formula. And of course, the other thing that you get to put into this, your equation, is that, the price of electricity does tend to go up every year. If you own your own system that lasts for 10, 15, 20 years, guess what? Your rate remains the same for that period of time, and you're recouping that all the time as the prices go up as well. So that's another thing that you need to weigh into your equation when you're figuring out, does it make sense for me?
Yeah, like my house in South Carolina, it was on a fairly reliable grid, but every now and again, a nice sunshiny day with no storms, no people crashing into the equipment, we would just lose power with the sun shining. And if we had a power wall there, it would retain the power. And it's also in the middle of Hurricane Alley. So on those events where it snuck up on you and you didn't evacuate, or if it's a smaller one, you decide to shelter in place, it's kind of nice to be able to just ride it out.
And for some people using solar right now, I know that with a lot of programs where you store the power and the utility can pull from your battery when they need it, they even get paid for it.
Yep.
So, sounds good to me.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's lots of variations of this decentralized system that will work. For instance, you don't have room. Maybe your house has lots of trees. You can't put solar panels up. Well, then you're out, right? Not necessarily. Maybe in your neighborhood, you can put up. So they can put up solar panels that several houses could share via batteries. You're in an apartment. What about over the parking areas? If it's not over because the buildings may not support enough, there's always places to do this stuff. And rather than running transmission lines for 20, 30, 100, or 500 miles, we're running transmission lines from a set of solar panels that might be half a mile, a couple of blocks, a few hundred feet, rather than right on the roof. Again, all these different kinds of steps. When we look at the grid differently than big generators, wires to your house, as soon as we get rid of that paradigm, there's all sorts of possibilities and different ways to finance it that make sense for a wide range of people.
So certainly we look forward to see what's going to happen in Australia as they ramp into that 50,000 units out there, and how it's going to change their perception of it, and if it's going to become a model for the world. And we'll continue watching this story as time goes along.